between the two, and Pragg opens the game with 1d4. What is Fedosiev's response going to be here? He pushes his pawn to d5 and Pragg plays c4. We have the Queen's Gambit on the board and e6 played by Fedoseev. Knight to c3. And what is Fedosiev's response going to be? He plays the Tarash. Very interesting opening choice here by Vladimir Fedosiev. And now Pragg takes the pawn on d5. There is this sacrificial line with cd4 where you take queen d4 and so on. But Fedosiev decides to play very classical. He goes e takes d5. Now the Tarash has kind of an interesting reputation in the world of chess. It was played by Garry Kasparov at some point, and black is willingly taking on an isolated pawn after d takes c5. So the main move here is g3, and that's the very positional way to play. Pragg goes for a more active way with bishop to g5, and it feels so logical, right? You're spinning the knight, your threat is to take here and then pick up the pawn on d5, the queen takes back. So Fedosiev defends with bishop to e6. And now Pragg plays pawn to e3. He opens up his bishop here. And now c4. So we are not going to get into an isolated queen pawn position. c4 played, and very tricky move because you gain space, but also your d5 pawn becomes a bit weak. Now he takes. Queen takes is the obvious move. Then there are certain complications with queen a4 check. But Fedosiev thinks here for a long time, 17 minutes, and takes g takes f6. A shocking move. And Pragg plays a beautiful move now, g3. Why would you take and double your pawns when you could take with the queen? Turns out that maybe Fedosiev had mixed up certain move orders here and has gone g takes f6. But now Pragg is clearly better. The bishop comes and pins the knight, and Pragg plays his bishop to g2. He wants to simply castle now. So the knight comes out to c6. And one of the main problems that Fedosiev will face in this position is that because his pawns are doubled here, there will be ideas like knight h4, queen c2, knight jumping to f5, or even the queen going to h5, and so many other possibilities. Short castles on the board, and Fedosiev also short castles, not fearing any form of attack on his king. Now the best move here is knight h4, but Pragg goes knight e2, which is also interesting. He wants to play his knight to e2, but on the other hand, he wants to kick this bishop away and then come back. And he's essentially saying that your bishop is not as valuable as my knight, and I'm ready to trade. I don't want to trade the bishop for the knight. So rook c8 played. And now Pragg plays his knight to h4 after 23 minutes of thought. This is the phase of the game where Pragg starts to think quite deeply, and many times he gets under some time trouble. King moves to the side, opening up the g file for the rook now. What is Pragg going to do next is the question. He plays pawn to a3, very logical move. The bishop will be pushed behind. Bishop comes back to e7. And now you can continue with some ideas like queen c2, but Pragg goes for direct play. He pushes his pawn to e4. And with this, he's putting pressure in the center. If you take here, I simply go bishop e4, and then again d5 becomes a threat. So Fedosiev plays his rook to g8. He's like, if you take on d5, I'm ready with my bishop here. So rook e1 played by Pragg, and now the bishop goes back to f8. And the queen comes up to c2. So Pragg wants to bring his other rook to d1, and then he will have great harmony in the position b5 by Fedoseev. Look at the times on the clock. Rook a d1 played. Pragg has a great position, but he needs to make 22 more moves to reach move number 40, and he has just 21 minutes left on the clock. Now Vladimir goes knight to e7. He's defending his pawn on d5 here. And Pragg brings his knight to c3. The knight looks at the b5 pawn, also the d5 pawn in the center. He pushes his pawn to a6 and supports the structure. Pragg takes, knight takes d5, pawn takes d5. Look at the harmony in white's camp. Knight here, bishop here, knight is well placed, rooks, queen. He takes on d5. The best way to continue is to take and play bishop e4, attacking h7, and if you take, I take back with the queen with a very strong position. Instead, Pragg goes directly bishop e4. He doesn't really take first on d5 and attacks the pawn on h7. He goes knight f4, a very tricky move. The better way to play was to take first here and then continue, but instead he goes knight f4, and here Pragg starts to think, what exactly is his opponent planning? Can he simply not chop off the pawn here on h7? He takes it, bishop h7, attacking the rook here. The game is getting really intense because Pragg has 10 minutes, Fedoseev has 14 minutes on the clock. Rook g5 played. He brings his bishop back. So now Pragg is a pawn up along with having a great position. But Fedoseev has time on the clock, queen d7, and he's looking to create some mess here with his pieces aiming at the king side. King h1 played. 7 minutes left for Pragg. He has to make 16 more moves. The rook comes to h5 and maybe intending to sack here on h4 at the right moment. The bishop drops back to f3. And here black can go bishop g4, can also think about giving up an exchange. But Vladimir Fedoseev, this very intense moment, decides to save his rook with rook to h6. And look at the clock for Pragg. He has 5 minutes left and he starts to think. He thinks a lot and plays pawn to d5, 30 seconds. Nice move. The bishop has to move. You can go to h3 now, bishop h3. And while Pragg's position is great, bishop e4, he plays with just 49 seconds left on the clock. He's clearly going to be under big time pressure. Rook h5, the rook comes back. And knight e2. I love this move, which tries to trade off the active knight on f4. And Fedoseev takes it. Knight takes e2. Queen takes e2. And now notice how the king is thoroughly exposed. But Fedoseev pins the bishop here. And he goes f4. Well, if the rook has to go back, then white is completely winning after queen h5. But bishop g4, an excellent intermezzo. Because if you come back knight f3, I go back and this is all pinned here. It's not looking good. So he goes queen f1. And now Fedoseev should take bishop d1, queen d1 and c3. And his position is amazing. Or even king g8 here. But he's thinking here for a bit whether to take or not. and he goes rook h5, which is not the best move. Bishop comes back to f3. Pragg instantly plays it. He's keeping a minute on the clock. And now pawn to c3. The best move here was bishop h3, avoiding the trade and attacking the queen, but instead c3 played. And Pragg can now simply take the pawn. Take c3. He takes, b takes c3. The rook takes on c3. And Fedoseev here thinking he has the activity flowing. Bishop takes g4. Queen takes g4 played. And now Pragg has to be careful because his king is a bit exposed here on h1. But queen e2 is such a classy move. You can't move the queen away without losing the rook on h5. And so the only solution here for Vladimir is to take the queen. But that's a move you don't do happily here. So he takes, rook takes. The idea is to get in here and pin the bishop. Bishop goes to d6. Also stopping the pawn from moving ahead, but Pragg moves in instantly with a check. And king g7. In fact, he plays king h7, maybe not to get into a future check from the knight. So king h7 on the board, and Pragg now taking his time. He's used his time on the clock beautifully. Bishop, rook t8 played, but he has to calculate this move. Bishop takes f4, and Fedoseev takes it. Bishop takes, because if you take g takes f4, rook h4, this is excellent counterplay here. So can't take the bishop. He pushes the pawn to d6. He would like to push d7, check and make another queen. And he takes another pawn. If you take here now, rook takes g3, and this is a mate. Pragg finds another classy move, d7. And he reaches move number 40 here, so he'll get 50 extra minute. Rook takes h4. This is hanging, but now Pragg has to find the only move to win the game. It's not at all simple, but for him with so much time it is. Bishop c7 is coming in to stop the pawn here, so rook c8 just does the job. Pragg drinks some water, calms himself down, and after a short think just plays rook to c8. Fantastic move, and this is the only move that was winning, which Pragg had seen from a distance. If you want to go into this line, you have to have seen the move rook c8, and then rook takes h2 comes in with a check, but it's just one check in the position. Now Pragg can simply move his king away, king to g1, and Vladimir Fedoseev has absolutely no moves here. He takes the pawn, but now you can make a queen when you will have... Okay, Fedoseev has a bishop and 4 pawns for a queen, which is some material, but after Pragg queens the pawn, which he does here, it's just losing because now the king is too exposed. He plays bishop to e5. And Vladimir Fedoseev gets up. In some ways, he's showing Pragg that he is quite confident here. But of course, Pragg just has to calculate one move. Queen g8 check. And Fedoseev comes into the game with a T. and it's quite funny because he's going to lose this game on the next move itself, because after king h6, which is the only move, there is queen f8 check, and he loses the rook on a3. So the t that he got is not so useful. A smile on Fedoseev's face as he resigns there. Very good sport.